Hi, I'm Ken Jacobson, and welcome to Top Docs. Today we're talking to director Sam Feder and producer Amy Scholder about their documentary, Heightened Scrutiny. Sam Feder is a Peabody Award-nominated director of such acclaimed films as Disclosure, Kate Bornstein is a Queer and Pleasant Danger, and Boy I Am. Amy Scholder is a renowned literary editor and filmmaker who produced Disclosure and My Name is Andrea. Sam Feder, welcome to Top Docs.
Thank you so much, Ken. I'm a big fan of the show.
Well, thank you. And Amy Scholder, welcome to Top Docs.
Hi, Ken. Thank you for having us.
You bet. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm excited to talk about your film, which I, saw at Sundance, but I've seen it just this past week. And there's obviously a lot to talk about. But I actually want to start with Disclosure, just a question about Disclosure. The two of you came together as a creative team on the 2020 documentary Disclosure, which focuses on the history of trans images in movies and television. And, I would say that film thematically, in terms of its focus on media representation of trans people, and stylistically, I think to some extent, is a forerunner to Heightened Scrutiny. In what ways did making Disclosure sort of lay the groundwork for Heightened Scrutiny? And obviously, they're also very different topics, but just curious about how one may have led to the other in some ways.
And they're absolutely connected. When I set out to make Disclosure, it was because I was concerned about the ways in which the rise of trans visibility was happening. I thought it was happening too quickly. I thought it was misguided, misused. And I really feared what the backlash would look like when it would come. It seemed very, very clear that it would come. And the reason I thought it was inherent was because I knew that most of the people, at least in our country, didn't know trans people, right? And that the only trans people that they had been exposed to were the ones in film and television. And so I wanted to create that history so that people could see what most of the rest of the world thinks about us and understand how that had not only impacted what other people thought of trans people, but also how trans people felt about themselves. And I wanted people to see this to understand how brutal the backlash was going to be. And so, it was only maybe a year after Disclosure came out that we started seeing that backlash.
What about for you, Amy? As you decided to join with Sam and make Disclosure, what were the issues foremost in your mind? And then how did those issues play into the journey of making Heightened Scrutiny?
Well, in 2016, when I met Sam and he was telling me about the research he was doing for this film, I immediately understood how powerful it could be to tell us a kind of history of film and television with a trans lens. It reminded me of The Celluloid Closet, a movie in the mid-90s that tells the story of gay and lesbian representation, mainly in film. And that movie had a profound impact on me at the time as I was queer and trying to understand myself in the world and history of representation. And as someone who produced storytelling of many kinds. So Sam's vision for that film was very compelling to me, and I was ready to make a move into a different medium. And so it was the most natural thing in the world to join that production. 4 years later, when that movie premiered, when Disclosure premiered at Sundance and was acquired by Netflix, it was also when the world shut down with COVID, and Black Lives Matter was born in that summer. And we were in isolation, and I really didn't know what would be. I mean, the film Disclosure ends with this warning that with all this visibility that we're seeing, if there isn't a social movement and a coalition social movement behind it, there's going to be backlash. I don't think any of us could have imagined how brutal this backlash could be, and that there would be this kind of attack coming from a major political party that would begin to legislate against the civil rights of this community. It's been brutal, and as we were seeing it early on, it was just terrifying, especially because we were all in isolation. But when Sam came to me with this idea of how to show the connections between mainstream media coverage and public opinion and this legislation that was starting to creep into states across the country, it seemed very important to try and respond in the moment and to join this project.
So can you, Sam, tell us what is Heightened Scrutiny about?
You want the log line?
Let's go for the log line, Sam. In your own words.
We workshopped this so much. So fearless civil rights lawyer Chase Strangio battles at the Supreme Court for transgender adolescents' access to gender-affirming care, confronting not only the legal system, but also a media landscape that distorts public perception and threatens the struggle for trans rights. With the dangerous SCOTUS decision holding up the ban on life-saving care, Heightened Scrutiny is an urgent call to action against bigotry and injustice.
So at the height of your movie is Chase Strangio and this case, United States versus Scrutiny, which Chase is going to be giving the plaintiff's oral argument in the Supreme Court. Can you tell us a bit about this case and how, if the law is upheld, it will impact trans youth in Tennessee, which is where that case is based?
Yeah, for sure. So the case was argued December 4th of 2024, and the opinion actually was announced June 18th. But the background is that the state of Tennessee had banned gender-affirming care for trans adolescents. And then that case made its way up to the Supreme Court to decide whether it's constitutional to ban access to care for just one class of the population. And ultimately, the courts decided that yes, it was constitutional to ban medicine to just trans kids that continues to be available to non-trans kids. And that was decided June 18th.
How is it that the ACLU became involved in the case, and what led to Chase becoming the lead attorney?
I mean, Chase can speak to that in ways that I cannot. I mean, my understanding is the ACLU came on early to challenge the ban at Tennessee. I can't remember the exact steps. I'm not a legal expert by any means, but the ACLU was there from the beginning. And then by the time they knew that the Supreme Court would hear the case, it was clear that Chase had enough experience and was the best person to do the oral argument.
My understanding is that the ACLU represented the families that were contesting the ban.
Yeah.
And that the federal government under the president Joe Biden, they were contesting the state of Tennessee. So the federal government was pitted against the state of Tennessee and asking the Supreme Court so ACLU joined the federal government to contest this ban in the state of Tennessee. And of course, after the arguments were made and after Trump was elected, he had the federal government switch sides. And so the case changed, and it became only the families against the ban, and the federal government no longer was contesting the state of Tennessee's ruling.
It's a little bit convoluted in that regard. Thank you for clarifying that. And I think it is an important point that Chase and the ACLU are representing these families. And I think this comes through in the film time and time again, is that Chase always has the families and the youth foremost in his mind. That's who he's defending and fighting for. Speaking of Chase, when did you all first meet? And obviously, when you make a film like this, it's a collective decision. So what made, say, the three of you want to embark on this journey together and make this film and this type of film, which is very much an observational film of what Chase is going through the various stages leading up to his argument before the court?
I mean, we had met Chase back when we were working on Disclosure. I had heard Chase speak many times about how the rise of visibility and the potential risks that might pose. And so I'd asked him if I could interview him to speak about that. And he does a beautiful job at the end of Disclosure of really grounding how representation of trans people could really incite rage in the viewer. And so we stayed, in contact over the years. And I always saw him speaking about and posting about not only, Hollywood representation, but the ways in which mainstream narratives were harmful to trans people. And so we included him immediately when the film was just about the media, which the first, 6, 7 months, that's all it was about. And we included him in those interviews because he talks about it all the time. And then when it was announced that he was taking the Supreme Court was taking the case, we just reached out again and just, started talking like, this should be documented, would you consider letting us follow you? And then it went from there.
And it's historic, this is like a first in the way that Bader Ginsburg was a first and Marshall was a first. There's a way in which we were adjacent already making this film to something, to making his, recording, documenting history. And in that way, I think, we didn't want to lose that opportunity.
And by historic, you don't just mean the case, but the fact that Chase is going to be the first trans person arguing a case before the Supreme Court, or openly trans.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to ask about that. I mean, that's when Chase is when it's clear Chase is going to do that and he accepts that task, it immediately does rise to the level, I think, of being a historic moment. And that is, pretty heady stuff, not just for Chase, but, now for your film. And yet what's striking in watching the film is it doesn't overwhelm the film. Clearly, Chase is a very sharp person, an incredibly impressive legal mind, but he's also a pretty chill guy, I think, a lot of the time when he has the time, at least. And I wanted to just ask you about how you kind of balance the more thorny political issues, the deeper issues, the more serious issues with kind of these lighter moments that really captures who he is as a person.
I mean, despite the fact that he hates being on camera, the camera loves him, and you see who he is. He's funny. He makes jokes, he's very serious. He is always working, so that was crucial to show the whole person and the sacrifice that a person has to make to do this work. And the pressure that is on a single individual, even though it was a whole movement and a whole organization and years of movement building that led to this. But I think it was really important to see the person behind it all. And the fact that he was the first out trans person to argue at the Supreme Court is really, really important for many reasons. And that's not why he was the person to argue the case, right? He was just the best person to argue the case. He is the expert. He just knows this history inside and out. And his transness is important because it informs his lens into a specific sensitivity and understanding. But the film, and I think this is because, we're a queer trans crew, it doesn't harp on the fact that he's trans, and I think that could have easily happened had it been another crew. His particular transness could have taken up a lot more space. But, we wanted his humanity to take up all of the space.
Yeah, and I really love that about the film. And I love observational filmmaking, but I know it presents a unique set of challenges. Can you talk about the challenges and the pleasures of shooting observational footage over this time period with Chase? And you're there through, a lot of emotional highs and lows. We have the election, we have the court's decision to take the case. There's a lot going on.
We were really lucky that one of Chase's friends who was with him a lot of the time was able to capture a lot of those moments on an iPhone, believe it or not.
Okay.
Like iPhones shoot beautiful footage these days.
Yeah.
And that felt really important, that there would be someone with him that he was very comfortable with. And it would just be unobtrusive, and he just like share this moment. From the start, that felt important to the production because things were moving so quickly, and we wouldn't be able to get a crew together in 3 hours sometimes, when something was happening. So that was part of our process throughout. The joy of observational film is that every day is a surprise, you know, for better or worse. But, things happen and you're like, oh my God, this completely changes everything. That's wonderful. And then sometimes things get canceled, or you're not able to get a shoot you want, or, like people's schedules. I mean, this is now maybe TMI, but there was one shoot that I was really excited about, and then my dad passed away, so like things happen in that you can't continue down the road you thought you were going. But like you said, some of it is very joyful and exciting and makes the film so much better, and some of it makes things really hard.
And also hard on the producer sometimes.
No comment.
Well, that's interesting to know about the iPhone footage, which maybe if I, watched it again, I would maybe be able to see what that was, but it didn't stand out to me. So you did a good job in post, I'll say that.
You have a great
We're
post house,
visiting.
Dungeon Beach.
Yeah.
Dungeon Beach, they're amazing.
Beach is our post house, and they were fantastic.
I want to go back and talk about the role, the mainstream media, which really plays a pivotal role in all of this, and in the laws that the states created, and the arguments that the state's lawyers made before the court, and the extent to which the court was receptive to those arguments. It's all part of a piece here, and it is striking and it's disturbing. Can you talk about the role of the mainstream media, by which, we're talking about publications like the New York Times, the Atlantic, the New Yorker, Wall Street Journal, et cetera, many of which, not the Journal, but are, what we would call center-left publications. Their role in covering trans people and their medical care, and the particular lens that they have used time and time again in their coverage, and how that played such a key role in this issue and continues to.
Without saying how or why, we did notice that after years of increasing visibility for trans people in popular culture, we were seeing, by the time Disclosure came out in 2020, this kind of celebration of certain trans people in the popular culture, and the mainstream media would tend to kind of cover those trans people as a kind of human interest story. And it was sort of be a pat on the back of like, aren't we, we're putting a spotlight on these people. Whether it was because they were already celebrities, or were new to the red carpet, there was this sense of like real kind of appreciation. And before long, like by 2021, 2022, you would see in the New York Times or the Atlantic a very different kind of coverage creeping into those outlets, where there would be a kind of question about transness, about trans healthcare. Is it too much? Is it coming too fast? Is it too soon to consider healthcare for trans adolescents after decades and decades of this being a matter between families and doctors, and there being protocols that were honed for a very, very long time? Suddenly, these mainstream outlets were questioning something that had really been settled science-wise in the example of healthcare. And it would be like, we've agreed in most mainstream publications that climate change is real. It would be as if like there was a turn And we were going back to this like climate change in quotation marks and a debate about whether it's happening after years and years of settled science. I mean, no analogy is perfect, but that one comes to my mind often as I see these front page magazine stories and front page news stories and opinion pieces that question and debate whether or not trans people should have access to health care, to public space, to their ability to compete in sports. And it it is so disturbing how quickly that happened. And that was really the impetus for this film, seeing how those well-placed articles and opinion pieces were then influencing those readers, which are mainstream, mostly, so-called liberal readers. All of us, I'm sure, consult many of those news outlets often, and many people only consult those for their news. And it had an enormous, it was like a wildfire, right? Where you would go from this sense of trans people having allies extending well beyond the trans community to trans people becoming more and more isolated as more and more of those allies believing what they were reading, which were really often, as we show in the film, articles filled with misinformation, bias, whether it's unconscious bias or not, it's bias, and it has had incredibly harmful impacts.
One of the things that's surprising to me, at least, is when Chase talks about how, and we even see the graphic of these being circled, how these articles are being cited in these legal briefs, which is very unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, my understanding is that I mean, I spoke to a few lawyers who said they've never seen that. And I think, as Chase says in the film, like you go to medical experts, you go to scientific experts to talk about these things. You don't quote some article from the New York Times or the Atlantic or the Wall Street Journal. But I think that's also a testament to that's the only place they could find, anyone to be skeptical, because all the medicine, all the science supports all the care that transgender people need access to, including trans adolescents. So yeah, it was very, very unusual and very alarming to see how that could happen and how it leads directly to bills that criminalize trans bodies.
The title of the film is Heightened Scrutiny, and it's, I think, a play on words. I think we could say that for sure. One of the meanings is the legal definition in relation to legal precedent. Can you talk about the role that heightened scrutiny played in the argument that, Chase was making before the court? What was the basis for Chase's argument in the case?
I mean, the whole point of heightened scrutiny is to ensure constitutional protections, right? And that means in practice that the role of the court is to scrutinize the government when the government is targeting unpopular minoritized people against discrimination. But in this case, rather than the government being scrutinized, trans people were being scrutinized.
It's also a standard that needs to be met in order for the government to be able to pass laws like Tennessee, right? The film is not all just legalese, for sure. For people who have not seen the film and legal arguments and so on, it's also a character study. And besides Chase, the film also introduces us to a 12-year-old trans girl named Mila and her mother, Maria. And they have just, a wonderful, touching relationship. And Mila is an incredible young person who's really finding her voice over the course of the events in the film. Can you talk a bit about them and, why you decided to follow them as well and include their story in the film?
I mean, very early on, we knew we had to figure out a way to include a young person's voice, right? This national debate was happening in the name of young people, but no one was giving them a voice, right? The media was not asking them questions. But we were really reticent about filming a young person, right? There's like, what are the ethics around that? Um, and we spoke to many people. We had many brainstorming sessions, and we really were at a standstill for a long time. And I met Mila before we started following the case. I met Mila because Chase and some of his friends were organizing groups of trans people to go to these school board meetings where the school boards were passing resolutions against their trans students. And so Chase was organizing adults to come and stand up and be there to show support and speak out. And so I just started going to these meetings as just a supportive adult, right? Just to be there, and quickly realized that this has to be documented. This is really scary stuff. Not knowing what it would be used for, but that was sort of my approach. So then I went to another meeting with a camera person, and is the meeting where you meet Mila for the first time in the film. And as I was standing outside of the school, this young person runs up to me and tells me that I have her permission to film her. Like, just so that is Mila, right? That is Mila in a nutshell. And then, thank you very much, Mila. Actually have to speak to your mother about that, but thank you. And then, we all go inside, and then you see what happens inside, and just I don't know spoilers, but it is a really intense scene in the school board where Mila is sticking up for herself in a way I've never seen a 13-year-old do. Barely see adults do. But again, this was before we were following the case, before we knew we would have this observational thread. But then as we started following Chase, we learned that he and Mila have a friendship and their families have friendships. And we just started having conversations of like, what would it be like? And how do we all feel about including Mila? And we spoke to Mila's mom. And so it just happened very slowly and organically. And of course, Mila was thrilled about it. She loves, she knows her power, and it's very effective. And I just love the fact that other young people can witness someone their age, taking this into their own hands, defending themselves, and also seeing the adults supporting them, behind them. I think it's really powerful. And I also was really wanted to work with an empowered young person, right? I didn't want to, like, we so often see these very true, but very sad stories about isolated kids who don't have support. And it just sort of feels like it's doomed, right? And I thought it was really important to show that there's a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of fight to be fought. There's still a lot of things we need to protect. And Mila shows that we're going to go forward, and it's not over, and the young people are going to make this right.
She's a great speech maker herself. We see that, in that one school board meeting. And then in the end, I love how you cross-cut, Chase's sort of final preparations and trip to the Supreme Court to make his arguments, with Mila and Maria's trip to DC to attend the rally that's happening right on the steps of the court. And Mila is going to speak, and she's getting herself psyched up.
It's so cute.
Yeah, but it really shows what's at stake here too, right?
Yeah, it's kids. Right now it's kids. Kids are being viciously attacked. That's huge. And then all trans people, right? Like we know that, and we talk about this in the film, that it's very strategic to start with the kids, right? It's very strategic to create this narrative that we have to protect the children because some harm is being done to the people by the people closest to them. And that could not be further from the truth. But this is how you build a movement around hate. Like, this is how you build a movement whose only goal is to eradicate a population, right? And in this case, is to eradicate trans people. I mean, we see a clip where someone actually says we have to eradicate trans people from, I don't know if he says the world or the earth or the planet. I mean, it all sounded like the same to me in that moment. There's a lot at stake right now for a lot of people, a lot of different people. And this is one story.
We're even seeing yesterday in the news that this is now moving to blue states in terms of the Trump administration going after doctors and doctors' records. This has already gone well beyond the court point, which seems to be, let's let the states decide. Well, federal government
Yeah.
is now deciding what should happen in the states.
It's
And-
terrifying what's happening in our country, right? I think if it's not clear already, like to people, like they're doing whatever they want. They're not abiding by any precedent or laws or restrictions. They're doing whatever they want. We've seen this with disappearing people. We're seeing this now, interference in states. And I think, there was that moment when we learned that, Zora Mondavi, won the primaries, and there was this moment of, oh, the people actually can make a difference. That was a people's movement that got him elected, right? That was not that got him, to win the primary. That was no thanks to any larger institution. That gave me a little moment of a glimmer of like, how can that unfold in all these other areas where we need to save people? I'm sure as everyone experiences, like it's day in, day out, how we're feeling optimistic, terrified. Are we leaving the country? Are we staying? Are we going to fight? Are we going to flight? But if we could apply that power, like, the power of the people, to quote, one of my favorite rock stars, the people have the power. Those are the only moments that give me some balm right now. I mean, I know, and I don't want to bring this on a down note. I'm happy to be here with you guys.
No, this is the reality, and it's time to, sound the alarm as loud as possible.
Yeah, no one's going to save us. I think that's the bottom line. No
Yeah.
one's going to save us, right? The government is certainly not going to
Yeah.
save us. The Democratic Party is not going to save us. But we saw in a moment that the people got someone elected who was very unlikely to get elected. And so we just have to run with that. We have to just constantly be empowered with that reality that it's true. And we're the only ones who are going to get us out of this.
The film ends with Chase arguing before the court. Obviously, we don't see that because no cameras are allowed. But by the way, you did do a very effective job, I thought, of presenting snippets of the oral arguments and the questions visually and making it clear who was saying what. And there were just some really key snippets from that case that was just very effective. The court did rule, in June, as you mentioned, 6-3 in favor of the state of Tennessee. So this law is allowed to stand, which will keep puberty blockers and hormones away from trans youth in Tennessee as an option, in spite of what parents and doctors and kids want. However, it was a 6-3 decision, which means the 3 liberal justices voted against it. And Justice Sotomayor wrote the minority opinion, and she was joined by Justices Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. She did read her dissent from the bench, which is one of these sort of symbolically important gestures when a justice really strongly opposes a majority decision. I sort of read in that dissent and in these 3 justices voting the way they did that there's a glimmer of hope there as well for a future court, probably a long way off from now. What did you, take from Justice Sotomayor's minority opinion and just what the future of a different court might lead to?
Well, I mean, I like that you are heartened by that. I was seeing the glasses half empty by that decision that only those 3 justices could understand the ways in which that ban discriminates against a class of people. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that young people across the state of Tennessee, as long as they're not trans, have access to puberty blockers and hormones, but only ones that attest that are avowed are taking those medications because they're trans. They get denied that same medication, and that's not seen as discrimination. It's mind-boggling to me. But yes, those 3 were avid and vocal, and that's a relief, for sure. But yeah, there's those younger Trump-appointed justices are going to be around for a long time.
They are.
Likely.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking, it made me think about Plessy v. Ferguson, in 1896, which upheld separate but equal. And it took, over 50 years for the court, a much different court, to overturn that with the Brown v. Board decision. But, that's what it took. It took different members of a court, of the court, to see the errors of the errors of the ways, whatever that expression would be in plural, of the earlier court to overturn it. It may take 50 years, but at least the seeds of the argument are there. It's just the votes aren't.
Yes.
The film ends with, it's funny, you see Chase go up the stairs, disappears, into the court. We see the rally happening on the steps of the court, and then Chase and some other lawyers come out. It's a great scene because Chase just wants to get out of there. It seems like they're like, no. You need to come here and you need to talk to this crowd. And he does do that. And as usual, he just says some incredible things. One of the things he said that stayed with me is, we are a refutation of everything they say about us. And then, I love being trans. And that notion of just being a refutation just struck me as just really powerful terminology and a powerful sentiment in multiple ways. Can you talk about just either that line or some of the things that Chase said after his argument?
There's something that was never lost on me. I mean, Chase and I have so many conversations about the law and the limitations of the law. What I love that I hear Chase say over and over again is that our ability to survive and thrive does not begin and end with the law. And I think that's what he's talking about in those moments. Like, we have been here since as long as humans have been here. We're going to continue to be here, and we're going to take care of each other. We've done it without the law before, and we're going to continue to do it without the law.
Well, in that day, that very, very cold day in Washington, D.C., on the steps of the Supreme Court, there were 2 rallies going on. We showed the rally that was there in support of Chase and the ACLU and waiting to support him, and when they came out of the courtroom. But right next to us, like just 10 feet away, was another rally of haters, simultaneously, with speakers and loud music and people with signage. And their message was hate. Their message was, these people don't have a right to exist. It was so startling to me to be there in person at that time and seeing Mila on the one hand giving that speech of like pride and confidence and hope for the future, in that speech she gave, and at exactly the same time, and it was a really challenging audio issue, but at exactly the same time, Marjorie Taylor Greene was giving a hate-filled speech, 20 feet away. It really made kind of like no sense to me how these people could get up in the morning and go out in the freezing cold with their signs disputing the realities of people that are just trying to live their lives and just trying to walk through life fighting for civil rights that they didn't have and their ancestors didn't have, that they want to guarantee for the future generations. But really not trying to take anything away from anyone. And to see the joy on the one side of the steps of trans people and all the allies and supporters there and the media covering them, really filled with life and love for Chase and the ACLU and the struggle to secure rights for everyone who doesn't have them. And then this other side, this like dour group of people who are really trying to limit how other people live. It really like defies any kind of rationality to me.
I did not think we needed to see that other rally, so I actually think that it works for the film, and it isn't necessary to see what's going on in another space there in terms of what's the most important thing that people need to take away. And I think you conveyed that, really well in that last scene.
Thank you.
I think that Chase has laid down and is laying down, with his ongoing work, a really powerful legacy as far as making a record, making an argument that needs to be made for trans rights. And your films are also a legacy, or will be. Is there anything that you think about as far as people years from now seeing your film and learning from it and kind of receiving it as part of this legacy?
When I reached out to Chase, asking him if we could follow him and document this story, he speaks about that conversation on panels and on Q&As, post-screening Q&As. And he says the reason he finally decided, because he hates being in documentaries, he's been in so many, he hates being in front of the camera, but he's made this commitment to the public. But he said what convinced him to do it was when I said, I just want the young people to know we tried. I want them to know that we fought and we tried. And that's how he felt too. And so that's how I feel about the film, that when people go back to try to understand this moment in time, especially the young people, to know that the adults stood up, right? And hopefully when they're looking back, it's a better world. But I think for so many people, it doesn't matter like identities or whatever, however you've been oppressed in the world, like a lot of us experience not being protected. And it just, that felt really crucial to me, that this generation understands that we tried, and that I hope they feel that despite all the horrors.
You definitely tried, and I would say you succeeded in many ways. These are tough times and a difficult moment, and I do think the film couldn't come at a more important time, unfortunately, but that's true. This film needs to be seen, needs to be discussed and felt, and I just want to applaud you for making it so well, and thank you for being with me today.
Thank you. Really appreciate those words. Thank you.